And welcome back in to Tribal Council Chats, the Mount Rushmore series. This is part two. Last week we did Boston Rob. And before we get started, we're your hosts like normal. My name is Bruce Heller. And last week with Rob, we had a guest on. We had Seth Bryant, who from Survivor Fan Jury is a huge Rob fan. We have a guest this week that I'm sure you guys are familiar with between his social medias and his appearances on here, making his new record, third appearance as a guest on Tribal Council Chat. We brought our friend Steven from Survivor Quotes back once again. Welcome back.
What's up, everybody? Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
No problem. Third time on the
Thank you so
show.
much
The
for
first
coming.
two were both a blast to record. I assume this will be the same.
I have high expectations, of course.
And so this is episode 2 of the Mount Rushmore series. We did Boston Rob last week. We've got Sandra this week. So before we kind of dive in and do a season by season recap, what are your overall thoughts? What makes Sandra one of your favorite players?
She has this uncanny ability to be completely unfiltered, but still manage to have that social charm, and just that ability to balance both of them is so rare. And it's something that is not really easy to describe, but we've seen it in action now 4 times, 5 times if you count Australian. And every time it's just like, how does she get away with this? She's
Uh-huh.
getting, yeah, she's getting away with things that no other player could possibly get away with. And we'll dive deep into those things, but just that social charm is something that pulls in a lot of people, myself included. And it's been so much fun to watch her since 2003.
Yeah. Like you said, I love her ability to just be completely unfiltered and say exactly what's on her mind, but also be so likable and so good at building social bonds with the people she's with. So it's impressive.
She has this quality that just no matter what she's saying, people want to listen to Sandra and be around Sandra and have her on their team to guide them through the game.
And we'll get to this when we get to that point in her career, because we'll go season by season, just like we did with the Rob episode. But I'm honestly, even though she goes home as early as she does, she impresses me a lot in Game Changers too.
I think it's interesting to note that the first 2 times she plays, she's not really seen much as the strategic player. It was more of Sandra the character, which we will talk about. But Game Changers is where I think the editing really flipped, and they showed us, okay, Sandra's been powerful in the past, but this is why, and this is how. And I thought that was really impressive. And yeah, she goes out on day 16, but she just, you still want to call her the queen because she still is.
Goes out
Oh,
on day
absolutely.
16, but there was two swaps. The first two tribes she was on, she was in control of somehow, despite coming in as
Yeah.
the only two-time winner and having a giant target.
Mm.
Managed to the the third tribe, just the numbers were out of her control. But we will get to Game Changers more in depth. Let's start at Pearl Islands. What kind of sticks out to you most here? Either of you?
Immediately right off the bat in the village, she's speaking Spanish, and I think that gave Drake such a good advantage in the beginning, where they were in high spirits, they had food, they had that camaraderie, where the Morgan tribe faltered in the village because they didn't speak the language and they were frantic. And it set the foundation so strong, and I think a lot of that was due to Sandra.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
we did a
Go,
Pearl
Bruce.
Islands episode in July, and one thing we both mentioned is how in this village, the Drake tribe has Sandra who speaks Spanish, and they get all the supplies and even go buy food, I think, from a barbecue nearby.
Yeah, she trades her gold necklace for it, and she's in
And,
Spanish. And the lady says, like, "Do you want the condiments too?" And Sandra's like, "Yeah, roll it all up."
and the contrast is Morgan tribe, who is getting frustrated with the shop owners and even arguing with them a little bit, which probably hurts their case to try to get supplies. So Sandra definitely came in clutch for Drake. That market really kind of set the tribe, set the dynamic for that season early on of Drake's gonna be really good in challenges and Morgan's gonna struggle.
That helped her so well too, because even in addition to being able to speak the language, when Jeff surprised all 16 castaways and said the game starts now, Sandra was really the one who was calm and in control, and that really put her as a leader right away. Whereas, and like we saw with the Morgan tribe that we were just talking about, they were, you could tell, a little taken aback by what happened instead of being ready to play, and that sent them into disarray. Whereas with Drake, Sandra was finding the barbecue. Um, Rupert was knew that he could take the other tribe's shoes and capitalize off that. Fairplay was being Fairplay and buying alcohol for the first day of Survivor.
Shocker.
And I think it's
So
really,
important.
like you said, set the tone. I know Austin sells all of his clothes and then he ends up getting sick and wants to quit. So that village really was the foundation, I think, of Drake's success in the first 3 episodes.
Yeah. I said this too, and we'll get back to Sandra specifically in a second. But despite Austin being sick and struggling and wanting to quit, one of my favorite Austin storylines is his rivalry with that pelican that was at Morgan Tribe's beach. That was hysterical.
Oh, he's waving the machete around.
Like, what are you gonna do? It's a pelican. It's not gonna hurt you.
Yeah.
But Sandra very quickly establishes her group in her alliance, which is her and Rupert and Krista. And that's a strong group early on with Drake Tribe. So good for her.
And I think if Drake had lost either the first or second immunity challenge, I'm not confident that Sandra would have stayed.
Yeah.
Just because her athletic ability is not up there with some of the challenges. And in the early seasons, that was really something that would send you home right away.
Yeah.
And she got lucky that the Drake tribe was able to win.
We even saw Johnny.
The first few allowed her to get over that, because by the time you're going to tribal on day 12 after throwing a challenge, there's already strategic lines in the sand that wouldn't be there on day 2 or 3.
And I think Johnny Fairplay was probably thinking similar to you, Steven, about her athletic ability and challenges, and kind of was trying to get ahead of that a little bit so that if they did lose a challenge, it'd be easy to put the target. Because we see him pointing out, hey, she's not a great swimmer. She's not great physically. And that leads to the famous argument between the two of them that features her saying, I can get loud too, what the bleep? And him saying, gosh, all you want is the last word. And her responding, then shut up so I can have it. And I believe that's also where we get the confessional where Fairplay says she won't be one of the final two. And I have $1 million bet that says she won't be the last one.
Mm-hmm.
Which is funny knowing what happens, but I think you're onto something. I think what he was doing was trying to point out her physical shortcomings to the rest of the tribe in case they lost.
And I think if any other player had gotten to a fight with Fairplay that early and cursed him out like that, he would have held a grudge. And he does hold a grudge to Sandra, but he never acts on it. And I think either it's a factor that he underestimated her because of her physicality, or it's just her social ability. I don't know. It's just she's got this magic, and it's so beautiful to watch.
I think he underestimated her a lot of the game because my guess is he thought he took 2 goats to the final 3, thinking he'd beat either of them. And I don't think he beats her. He beats Lil because she's Lil, but to prove your point about grudges, though, we see Fairplay and Sean get into a bit of an argument, and Fairplay does hold a grudge more than he does with Sandra, and Sean does go home shortly after. So,
yeah, and he has that famous "fu" confessional.
Yeah,
which I can't believe CBS aired that. Like, that's so crazy.
it's think I've heard Fairplay say somewhere that like he watched like Real World or Road Rules or some like that type of reality TV before coming on to the show,
Mhm.
which he kind of does give off that MTV vibe a little bit with things like that voting confessional. So
Yeah. And I think it's interesting also that the fact that they don't go to tribal council, her tribe, for the first 3 episodes, she
yeah,
builds up this bond with Krista and Rupert, and they become that power trio of Drake and kind of just run things all the way up to the Outcast twist.
yeah. And then this was an interesting question I had that we asked on our Pearl Islands episode last month. If now both of the people that got voted back in, Burton and Lil, drew the buffs from their original tribe, do you think anything drastically different happens if they draw the opposite buffs? Say Lil comes back to Drake and Burton goes to Morgan?
I'm not I'm not convinced that Burton would have stayed with Drake had he been flipped to Morgan. Um, there is no vote while they're part of these tribes
Yeah,
until they merge. So I think Burton may have been persuaded because he didn't have that conversation with Rupert that explained why he was voted out. So maybe he had some bitterness that didn't get resolved if he's put on Morgan and he gets
yeah,
pulled in by Rhino and Andrew and T and Dara. But I also see Lil immediately getting sucked into Drake like she did.
yeah,
So
yeah,
ultimately, I don't know if it would have been a big change, but potentially could have given the Morgan tribe an extra vote. So,
yeah. I would agree with that.
yeah,
And like you said, no tribal councils happen. So like how different can it really be? It's just kind of an
mm,
interesting thought.
yeah.
But
And then I think before we go too far into Pearl Islands, we have to mention when she goes over to the Morgan tribe to take one item, and she goes
yeah,
for their tarp, and the Morgan tribe doesn't want to help her take down the tarp. And I don't blame them. I wouldn't want to help either. So what does Sandra do? She takes apart their whole shelter. What other player in the history of Survivor up to season 7 could have possibly done that, said no hard feelings, don't let the bed bugs bite, see you later, and walk away and have them be like, yeah, she's a bitch. But then that's it. Like, there's no pushback ever from that. That's amazing.
yeah, it really is incredible. It's we forgot to mention that on our Pearl Islands episode somehow, but
It's one of my
no,
favorite moments. I crack up every time I
it,
watch it.
that might be my favorite moment from the pre-merge.
Hmm.
Here's an interesting tidbit though of trivia. I forget where. I think I heard him say this on a YouTube video from his podcast, but I've seen Fairplay say that the mutiny twist that they did in Cook Islands was offered in Pearl Islands.
Hmm. Yeah,
Nobody
it
took
was.
it, so they didn't air it. But Fairplay, what he said was he was trying to use that to force the merge and have people mutiny in a way that they'd all end up on one tribe.
It's an interesting idea. Um, I have heard that from him before, and I believe Rupert spoke about it once. Um, I did he mention when it happened though? I can't remember. Was
I
it?
don't remember, but my thought is like production has this, and like Probst has said this, when the merge happens, when swap stuff like that is already scheduled ahead of time, and like the way
Mhm.
the game happens doesn't usually change it. If the players would have forced the merge way earlier than production was in, I'm curious how that would have affected their schedule.
I wonder if they heard about this like potentially happening and kind of tried to shut it down.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know because I know they offered it in Thailand, but
Ooh, interesting. I didn't know
yeah,
that.
they offered it at the food auction, which was strangely between two tribes. Um,
That
and Sheehan and Jan thought about flipping, but never did.
Yeah, the tribal auction is weird. A lot of stuff from Thailand just makes me shake my head. But
Yeah,
except for the scene where one tribe just completely loses their boat overnight. That's funny to me.
yeah,
But
yeah. It just floats away.
but but see, I understand why you wouldn't take the mutiny. Because look at Cook Islands when Penner actually did, then no one trusts him. He left one group, the other group doesn't trust him because he left the other group, then he leaves that group to go back to his original group. Like, I get not taking the mutiny. It just puts a target on you mostly.
I don't blame Candace for doing it, but
Yeah.
I think Penner would even admit it was a poor decision.
Well, and if Penner had just stuck with his decision and not gone back to I2,
Yeah.
it wouldn't have. But I love Penner, and he's great television, especially that season. So I'm happy he
shows
did.
you too
But,
how that just shows you too how good of a player Ewell is.
yeah.
Mhm.
But moving into the actual merge that was not forced early, Sandra's in a pretty good spot coming in. And her tribe is able to capitalize on Lil's bitterness towards Savage and towards Morgan and bring her in as a number to give them an advantage.
Mhm. And I also think like the previous two rounds where Trish tries to make a move against Rupert and Sandra shuts it down, and then they vote out Sean because they want to stick with John for some reason. Like Sandra puts herself in a good position. So come the merge, she is now in the majority alliance. Savage is gone. They knock out Rhino because he's just one of the Morgan numbers. And that's where things in Pearl Island start to get really more crazy.
Yeah. And to Sandra's credit, we've talked all the way to this point about this trio of her and Rupert and Krista. Rupert gets voted out in the early merge, and Sandra really doesn't falter any. Like normally when one of your top allies goes home, you fall a little bit, but she keeps going great. She dumps out all the fish he got, and
How does she get away with that?
yeah.
Yeah, she spills all the fish and then she blames her best friend. Like that's such a ballsy move and it could so easily backfire, but she sells it with such sassiness that she's become iconic for. She immediately starts cursing out fair play to give herself an alibi, and it's so good.
One of your two top allies gets voted out, and then you immediately put a target on the other one, the only one you have left.
Mhm.
What a wild move. And it didn't cost her. It worked. That's what's wild.
Yeah. And the best part is she's openly against fair play the whole time.
Oh yeah.
She's telling him to his face, like, I don't like you, but if you need me for a vote, I'll do it. Like, I'm a spare vote. And there comes in what she's known for, anyone but me. So I think fair play doesn't take her seriously, but she knows what's going on. She takes T into the woods to eavesdrop. It's such a departure from the Survivor that we've been watching for the first 6 seasons
Yeah.
that just it makes Pearl Island so iconic and just it's so different. You couldn't replicate that season.
Yeah. And the eavesdropping really was ahead of its time. We see, and he's very entertaining about it, and he's a great confessionalist. But we see Tony get a lot of credit for the spy shack and the spy bunker and eventually the spy nest. Sandra was doing it 21 seasons before Tony ever started to try to prove that the people T thought she was with weren't actually with her. It was brilliant.
Yeah, when she was like, listen, you think they like you? You want to hear them talking crap about you? Come with me. And so they just eavesdrop on Fair Play and Burton just ripping the girls from Morgan apart. And to Sandra's credit, she manages to save herself. And what does she do? She throws T under the bus. So
Yeah.
it's just none of this should happen, and she shouldn't get away with this in normal Survivor, but she does, and
Yeah.
it just makes it's juicy. I'm talking about it now, and I first viewed it in 2003, and I'm still getting giddy about it because I remember being how excited I was.
One of my favorite moments, and this is great editing too, is it's kind of a back and forth, is Burton and Fairplay. It's Final Five, and Burton and Fairplay are at this reward at some sort of ruins, saying, "Oh, the girls have us outnumbered. If they were smart, they'd plot against us, but we're fine. They're not smart enough to do that." cut back to camp and Sandra's rounding up the three girls together to then vote Burton out. Like it's a great contrast of Burton and Fairplay just completely overestimating themselves and underestimating the women, especially Sandra.
Yeah, and then Fairplay comes back and has Sandra cross her fingers or show that she's not crossing her fingers to make that promise. And she says that great confessional of,
Mhm.
I said under my breath, I'm going to screw you and Burton. And I was at home just like, yeah, do it. Like, we were so excited because I think 98% of the audience was on her side. We all hated
Oh
Fair
yeah.
Play then. It was the cool thing to hate Fair Play. And
I'm
looking back now, we all realize like he was a great strategic player, but he was an asshole and he would admit that himself.
yeah,
And so we were all on Team Sandra at that point.
he can
Final
be a
five
great
episode was
he
that
can
final 5 episode has to be one of the best hour episodes of old school Survivor.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Fairplay is a great strategic player. He's an iconic player. But at the same time, like even now, I still am not the biggest fan of his. Like he's still like he's entertaining, but like you said, he's kind of an a-hole the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
So
And
and
then
based on interactions, I'm pretty sure Jeff doesn't like him also. I could be wrong about that, but it doesn't seem like he does.
yeah, which I think is a shame because I would have loved to have seen him back at some point, but
Yeah.
there has to be another reason why he's not.
Well,
Um,
they did bring him back, and then he
yeah,
kind
no,
of so.
yeah.
I've said, and this is a great segue into the next season. I have always said I would have loved to have seen him on Heroes versus Villains instead of Randy, because two of the most iconic rivalries in the show's history are Sandra Fairplay and Sandra Russell. So having her on a tribe with both of them at the same time would have been interesting.
Yeah, I don't have many gripes with the casting of Heroes versus Villains, the way it
Yeah,
played out,
it's a great.
but I think that if Fairplay had been on Micronesia like he was and gone out early, I would have loved to have seen him on Heroes vs. Villains. When you think of
Yeah.
Survivor Villains, you could mention to someone who hasn't watched in 10, 15 years, hey, remember that guy with the fake dead grandma lie? They all would remember Johnny Fairplay.
Yeah.
And
And
I remember when the cast was announced for Heroes vs. Villains, I was looking through it and I saw Sandra and I was like, oh, like I obviously remembered Sandra, but she wasn't known as a good player necessarily. She was well liked. People thought she was a good player, but not like a strategic player, not a physical player. And she was mostly known for her battle with Fair Play and for her cursing language and everything. And she was a character, and we all loved her. But she kind of fell off into the background for a while. I know she was
yeah.
invited back for All Stars, but couldn't make it. Um, and then to see her back for Heroes vs. Villains, I was so excited, but not many people ever thought we'd see the return of Sandra Diaz Twine. And I'm so glad we got it.
Yeah, for sure. So as we kind of move into her second season, what are kind of some of your all's thoughts from Sandra's game in Heroes versus Villains? What sticks out to you? What is different or the same from her first season as we kind of move into the next season?
I think she goes in with the same strategy of anyone but me.
Yeah.
And I'm going to build my quick little clicky alliance. We're going to be bitches to everybody and we're going to have a great time. And it works. And it's not until the coach episode that she really has to make, start spitting these lies. And we'll get that far. But in the beginning, she just has to really lay low and build those social bonds that she's known for.
Yeah. And she does a great job with it. And
what sticks out to me for her game in this season is that Sandra, and I think this really contributes to the end result of Heroes versus Villains. She's the one player who, at the same time of being on a season called Heroes versus Villains, still knew she was playing the game of Survivor, not this war between the two sides. And therefore, it's like specifically, I think of when Lupa got voted out, her old ally, but at multiple points during the game, she doesn't see the Heroes tribe as her adversaries as much as she sees them as potential jurors that she needs to win this game, just like the other 19 seasons.
Mhm.
And I think that's part of what wins her the game. Heroes versus Villains is one of the most debated and talked about final tribal councils, and it's mostly a debate between two people. There's a section of people that argue Russell should have won, but it feels much smaller. And I think what won Sandra the game over Parvati was at the merge, Russell had the heroes fooled. Sandra tried to go to them and say, he's not what you think.
Mhm.
He needs to go. And they didn't listen to her. And when they got voted out, I think they realized, as dirty as Russell played us, Sandra tried to warn us. And
Yeah.
Parvati didn't distance herself from Russell enough, I guess. And I think that simple move of trying to warn them about Russell, I think may have been what won her the game.
I think Parvati's mistake came when they voted out Courtney. Um,
Yeah.
Granted, that's hindsight because Sandra goes on and flips, but I think it was Parvati's mistake in allowing Russell to push forward getting rid of Courtney, because we see that confessional or interaction with Parvati and Courtney where Parvati's like, would you be like willing to align with me? And Courtney's like, yeah, of course, like I don't care. But then also Courtney does have ties to the Heroes tribe, so it's a dicey kind of call, but I think that was Parvati's decision to go with Russell and getting rid of Courtney, and I think that bit her in the ass.
Yeah, and she does a little bit to kind of try to show she's not just following him along in the post merge. The
Mhm.
idol she doesn't tell him about, the episode where Danielle goes home, they kind of get into an argument a little bit. But I think it was too late at that point. But like you said, Courtney going home was was not Parvati's best move.
Yeah, Parvati could have pulled Courtney in under her wing, pulled her in with Danielle and her. Um, it could have
Yeah.
been a totally different game. Uh, I mean, it's easy for me to make these assumptions, but
Yeah. And so also, and this isn't the Parvati episode, so we'll get back to Sandra in a second. The weird, like awkward Parvati Amanda conversation at the merge didn't really
yeah.
help either person.
No, and
Yeah.
Parvati knew she was lying, and Amanda knew that Parvati knew she was lying.
Yeah, I love Amanda. She's one of my two favorite players of all time. Not a good liar.
No. But I think we skipped over Sandra's biggest moment in the pre-merge when
Yeah.
she gets coach out. And that I think really it shows her skills, her strategic skills. She knows Russell's an egomaniac. So what does she do? She goes to Russell and she's like, "Hey, coach is talking crap about you." And Russell at this point has managed the Tyson self blindside. He's eliminated Boston Rob, his biggest competitor so far, but he falls victim to Sandra's lies because Sandra is subtle in these moments. She
Yeah.
knows just to, hey, casually mention something that she knows is going to get under his skin. And she lights that fire and then she just lets Russell run with it. And that's brilliant. She realizes she doesn't need to be the one making all these decisions. She just has to set the Russell seed and let it grow. And it worked out brilliantly. Because if you think about it, those two episodes, the last two before the merge, should have been Sandra and Courtney being eliminated if we stick to the villains losing.
Yeah.
But she manages to save herself twice.
Heroes versus Villains is also kind of weird because two people pre-merge made the jury.
Yeah, that's happened on a few seasons, and I never liked it.
No, and I get
agree
wanting
with
to
it.
have a bigger jury, but then just have the merge be earlier. Why are we putting people on the jury who may or may not have ever played with the finalists? If the
Absolutely.
hero,
Exactly.
if JT wouldn't have done what he did, the heroes could have gotten merge numbers, and then Amanda wins sitting at the end, of course. But like, why are we having two people that only played on the villains tribe possibly on a jury with
Yeah.
hero finalists? I don't get it.
Well, I always think of like Cook Islands, where I think Rebecca is talking and she's saying like, Yule, Ozzy, like, nice to meet you.
Yeah, it's wild. So we
Uh,
move into the merge of heroes versus villains, and this is kind of what I was talking about earlier of the heroes have just assumed that there's a women's alliance going on the villains and that Russell's next and that they want to bring him in with them and he's Russell, he's got them sold on this and this was Sandra's move here. They don't believe her, but going to her trusted ally from Pearl Islands and saying Russell's not who he says he is, so
hmm.
Rupert can then go tell his tribe mates. Very subtle, just a simple conversation, but huge move from her there, I think.
I always wished that I'm glad the way it happened, everything worked out, but I always wondered what would have happened if she would have pushed it a little bit more.
Yeah.
Um, we only see her going to Rupert and being subtle about it, but I think if she really wanted to get Russell out, she could have done more. But at the same time, I think she knew not to rock the boat that much.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that was exactly what I was going to add into is you have to think of the question of does she necessarily want to do more either because she's gaining that trust from the heroes at this time,
Mhm.
but at the same time she still ends up sitting in the end with Russell. Does Sandra win for the second time if she sits in final three with Rupert and Amanda?
Yeah, I think she realizes she gets to extend the olive branch here to the heroes, and if they take it, great. If not, I'll go back.
Yeah.
So it's really a no-lose situation for her.
What's interesting is Jerry goes home final four, final boot. I think she wins if she's sitting at the end.
I fully believe that Jerry would have won, which would have been an amazing story. But
Yeah.
damn, Sandra is able to squeak by Parvati's ally being Danielle being dismissed, and then she flips Rupert and gets him out, and she has that great confessional of if I'm up there, you'll give me the $1 million vote again. And then
Yeah.
Colby just falls apart, and Sandra just squeaks by, and no one really takes her seriously once again.
And that episode where Rupert goes home is there's this great sequence where Rupert is kind of loose-lipped and tells Russell that Sandra isn't on his side.
Mhm.
We get this great moment where Russell, who kind of rules by fear, says, Sandra, are you with me or you're against me? And she just very openly says, I'm against you. But also is like, hey, Rupert, loose lips sink ships. And then that's when we get the voting confessional. I'll vote
And
you out, and if I'm at the end, you'll still give me the win anyway. Which is
and once
just
again, who else could get away with this? Where they tell the most arrogant, powerful player, "I'm against you," in like a deadpan,
yeah.
arrogant way, and she's fine. No one cares.
And then burns his hat a few episodes later.
Oh yeah, yeah. We'll get to that.
But
I think you get to a point where even though he can do that and get away with it, because at the same time, pretty much anybody left in this game by the time you get to the final third would be able to beat Russell.
Yeah.
yeah,
I think Parvati and Sandra both realized that maybe around the Candace Danielle episode that he was so hated that let's just go with him.
yeah,
Sandra has a few confessionals where she says she's been waiting to take him down, but I don't know. I think she knows. She knew with Lil and John, she needs to go with people who just aren't liked. It ultimately comes down to a lot of times whether or not people like you, and she realizes that, and she
yeah.
milks it for all it's worth.
And so the thing with Parv is, like, yes, she aligned with Russell, who was hated early on, and ultimately, I think, loses largely in part of being tied with him. He was the only one that wanted to work with her early on. She came in with that target. So
Yeah.
I think
Especially at the merge too, she was off on her own. So
Mm.
the great thing with this is with the heroes versus villains debate at the end is I love both people. Like I'm happy either way.
Yeah, I mean, I love Sandra for being a character and a player, and I love Parvati for being Parvati. I think she's an amazing player, probably one of the best.
Yeah.
So when I watched that finale, I was rooting for Sandra, but yeah, if Parvati would have won, I would have cheered either way.
As long as it wasn't Russell.
Yeah, yeah, I'm not a Hans fan by any measure.
Somehow not the worst Hans to appear on the show, though.
Isn't that bizarre?
That's insane.
Yeah, but then it's just so funny because, like I said, prior to Heroes vs. Villains, she wasn't in anyone's top five for being considered a great player. Not
Yeah.
that she was disrespected, but she was just kind of seen as an under the radar player. But then she gets to that reunion and Jeff says, "You won twice. Does this make you the best player ever?" And she has the tiara on. She goes, "That makes me the queen." And she is. And from that moment,
Yes.
that's her coronation. And no matter what happens,
Yeah.
whatever happens going forward, she's playing with house money. She doesn't
Yeah.
care if she wins or loses.
And the great thing is, I would kind of argue that what you're saying of how this really was Sandra's coming out as a great player, like an all-time great strategic and social player, that was kind of true for both of them. I feel like Parvati played really strong in micro also, but we really kind of saw her strategic side also here, which is part of, again, I just love that this was the final. It was a final 3 season, but Hans never had a shot. So I love that these were the final 2 that it came down between, because it was just
Yeah.
they both just played such phenomenal games. They both were deserving of the win in different ways, but
And I think people will be debating Parvati versus Sandra winning Heroes versus Villains forever.
yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So who would your jury vote go to if you were there?
It really depends on if I was voted out, how I would have been voted out.
That's fair.
I tend to think I wouldn't be a bitter player,
Yeah.
but I tend to be more emotional in my day-to-day life. So I have a feeling I would be bitter towards Parvati, so I probably would have voted Sandra.
I've
Hmm.
always thought I would have voted for Parvati just because with the target level on her, I always kind of felt like she had a harder road to get there in a way. But
Mhm.
what you're saying is really right. I think it would have determined on how I went out, or if either of them had a hand in it. That thought never really occurred to me before.
Yeah, I tend to be a little more sensitive in my day-to-day life. So I think if I get eliminated in a brutal way, I might be bitter. And I that's why I understand bitter juries. I don't love it,
Yeah.
but I understand them.
I've always said that a bitter jury is the fault of the player they're bitter towards.
Yeah.
And we talked about bitter juries a lot on episode 1 of the Mount Rushmore series with Boston Rob, because, All Stars happened, and he had the worst jury management ever by someone not named Russell Hantz. So,
Yeah, I mean, by all means, he should have won All Stars, but he didn't because of a bitter jury, and that's his fault.
and I refuse to feel bad for Lex, but even that situation, if you handle it with a little more grace, who knows? What
Mm,
he was still never getting Lex's vote, but
yeah,
who knows?
yeah. But then we go
I think
to
for me in that case, it's a bit hard to make up my mind between the two. When I watched it, just based on what I saw on the TV, I was leaning towards Sandra. Then 2 decades later, I took an online course called Win Beyond the Game, taught by Parvati, and heard all about her strategic point of the game. I've never met Sandra in real life, so that gives me a bit of a bias leaning towards Parvati now, but who knows?
But ultimately, it's like we all said. No matter who would have won, which one of the women would have won that season, we as the fans win because we get a great winner either way.
Mm,
They're both they're both iconic figures of the game. They both have an argument to be the best player ever. So
yeah, which is just so funny because if you think about Pearl Island, she wins, but she's not seen as a great player going into Heroes vs. Villains. And the same with Parvati. In Cook Island, she wasn't seen as the best player. She was kind of seen in um, a not so serious light. So
yeah,
coming into Micronesia, no one took her seriously, and they both come out of their second seasons being seen as great players. And then Parvati continues that into her third season on Heroes vs. Villains.
yeah,
They've become, like we're talking about, the Mount Rushmore of Survivor, and no one would have predicted that.
yeah. And Before we move on to Sandra's third season, shout out to this awesome finale moment I kind of mentioned where it's just Sandra and Parvati laying around camp complaining about Russell, and Russell's not there. So Sandra just stands up and throws his hat in the fire and comes back and lays back down, and the two women just are laughing about it. And I don't think Russell knew what happened to that hat until the episode aired, if I remember right.
And then I think she says something like, I felt bad at first because he said it was the hat he wore in Samoa, but then he started bad mouthing her and Parvati, and then she's like, then I didn't care.
Yeah. We also get an iconic quote from that scene of as she's throwing his hat in the fire, that's how much game I've got.
Yeah, and I think the most important quote to end Heroes vs. Villains with is when she's talking prior to Tribal Council, and she's talking about how Russell is going to bring her to the end and eliminate Jerry because he knows she'll never win. And she's framed by the bushes, and she goes, "But I don't know about that." And
Iconic.
us as the audience are just like freaking out because we all know, but oh, it's such a good season. I'm getting goosebumps now just talking about it.
You're getting more and more excited each season we've talked about, which we're about to get to Game Changer, so I'm guessing that's not going to continue. But
Yeah, I have a few problems with Game Changers.
yeah, it's underrated. The Varner moment is awful. It has too many swaps. Overall, I enjoy it, but ending Heroes versus Villains, there's a reason Heroes versus Villains is in the Survivor community kind of the consensus for best season. Even if it's not your favorite season, everyone kind of admits quality-wise it's the best.
I think Borneo is in a league of its own just because of the cultural situation surrounding it. But yeah, Heroes versus Villains is I can't imagine any super fan that doesn't have Heroes versus Villains in their top 5, and I would put it in my top 2, and it probably in my number 1. Yeah,
I think it's my third favorite. China, Cambodia, and then I've got my top 5 is basically the 3 Amanda seasons and 2 Kelly seasons, and then Edge of Extinction, the third Kelly season, is a little ways down the list. But
yeah, I go between Palau and Heroes vs. Villains as my favorite.
yes, if you haven't followed Steven's Twitter yet, you should. B, there is a lot of Karen from Palau content on there over the course of time.
She's over there on my message board.
Nice.
My wife still hasn't found her.
That's fantastic.
Heroes Villains at 1. Borneo, like you said, at 2. Winners at War, Long rounding out my top 4.
Mm-hmm.
Winners at War is iconic because it's a landmark number. It's an incredible cast, and at that point I hadn't seen every season yet. I went back and rewatched Winners at War in 2022, early 23, and the marooning is just incredible, knowing who they all are. And CBS put a lot of fanfare around it, but so many of the fan favorites went home early that season that I don't think it lived up to the full potential it could have as far as becoming an iconic season the way Heroes versus Villains is.
I blame Heroes. I think Winners at War would have been better without that swap to 3 tribes. I think Edge of Extinction made sense because they wanted more screen time for all the winners, but it didn't work editing wise. I don't know. I had such high hopes for Winners at War, but I knew based on previous seasons they were going to fumble the ball somehow. I'm still going to rate it a 9 point something, but it's just missing a pinch of.
This is kind of
why it didn't work perfectly at all. At the same time, it just sticks out to me when you're watching that season, no matter what point it is, that I'm like, I was in grade 5 and 6 as a huge Rob fan, and then in high school as a Parvati fan, and then in university as a Michelle fan. And now I'm seeing all of that come together on one season.
And on one tribe even.
It
But
was actually the first season that my wife watched Survivor with me.
oh, nice.
And at every tribal council, every challenge, we were sitting on the couch. I would have to like stand up and like, oh my God, I can't believe this. And she's like, what are you freaking out about? And I was like, I've been watching this show since 2000. Like, this is the Super Bowl put together with the World Series and the
Yeah.
Stanley Cup. Like, it's all put together. And she was like, I don't get it.
Just wait till 50 is Legends, and they'll somehow make a bigger production out of that if it's possible. They
I
put a
really
lot of
hope
hype
so.
on Winners at War. I don't know if they could possibly put more hype into it than they did, but 50 is
Yeah.
going to be huge.
So let's go to Game Changers. What do you guys think?
Yeah.
Um, Sandra comes in and everyone's saying no third, she can't win for a third time. And I don't know, could she have? Possibly. I, I didn't think it was impossible. And
She makes
she,
the move, she has a good chance.
mhm. She has that strategy of laying low. And even though she has that queen title and she's the first two-time Survivor player, we even see in the first two episodes she's not the threat, and not only is she not the one voted off, she's the one leading those two votes.
Yeah, I love the very brief Sandra Tony rivalry in Game Changers.
I loved the first episode where I thought they could work together, and I was like, oh, this would be perfect. And then when it flips, I was like, all right, Sandra's got to show him who's boss, and she does.
Which Game Changers is honestly one of my favorite versions of Tony, just because of the pure chaos of as soon as they get to camp, just announcing, I'm gonna go run into the woods and look for idols and taking off.
Tony should have never won Survivor. Like, that's just not realistic. But he does, and he does it twice, and it's so good.
He's so entertaining though. He's so freaking paranoid, but
I love him. I love Tony.
but one of my favorite reactions to a vote out at Tribal is when Tony goes home. And it's Sandra just be like, yeah, that's what you get for messing with me. That's
Yeah.
what you get. The queen stays queen. And she just keeps going. I think at one point she even says, say hi to Sierra for me as he's walking out.
Part of me wondered if she was buying into her own hype, but not in a obnoxious way, if she was doing it strategically to seem kind of cartoonish, to therefore lower her threat a little bit, and kind of like a flipped situation where, hey, let me be obnoxious and loud so people think like, oh, she's such a bitch. Like, we're not going to have to deal with her for much longer. And then that allows her some time to move on. And we see that at the next, I think, two tribal councils from there with the Malcolm vote. It should have been Sandra, and it's not. And that's wild.
Yeah. And I do love the moment in the pre-merge with her where I think the second tribe she's on, they find a goat in the woods.
Mhm.
And then they either had the baby and found the mom, or they had the mom and found the kid nearby. And
Mhm.
Sandra wants to eat it anyway. And there's a confessional of Malcolm going, well, Sandra wanted to still eat it. As a group, we decided not to because we're not heartless or something like that. And I'm like, just
Which
the goat was
I,
hilarious to me for whatever reason. And Malcolm's
I
reaction to it was great.
I don't know if you guys know this, but they actually did kill the goats and ate them off camera.
Interesting. I did not know that.
Right, you're
Oh,
shaking your
really?
head. You knew that? Yeah,
Oh,
it
I knew
came.
that.
Yeah, they ate one of the goats. I don't know who it was, but someone used a rock and hit it on the head, and they ate it.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Not
Yeah,
surprising, but because, they're
yeah.
starving. But,
I'm sure if anyone listening wants to look it up, they could just look it up on Reddit.
oh, yeah. And then, yeah.
But we got to talk about the JT episode.
Oh, gosh. I
When she
love JT his first season, but he becomes progressively a bigger bonehead each time he returns.
and Sandra knows, I think, that he's desperate to reclaim his kind of status. And what does she do? She does what she normally does, and she frames her friend Michaela for taking the sugar. Meanwhile, she's the one eating it, and she makes the face to the camera. And JT gets pissed at Michaela, and that takes the target off Sandra.
And JT somehow leaves his idol at camp,
I can't
knowing
believe that, even
knowing
all these
he
years
was
later.
knowing that anytime there's an argument, the two people in the argument are both likely targets.
And even if they're not in an argument, why would you not bring your idol any time? Like, that doesn't make any sense to me ever. Unless you have individual immunity and you have no allies to give an idol to, why would you leave it at camp?
I will give JT credit for this. The way he found that idol was incredibly funny to me. Just putting his entire tribe on a raft, stranding them in the ocean, and then going back to camp while they can't get their way back.
Yeah, that was pretty brilliant.
Like, JT's a bonehead in his second and third seasons, but he's an entertaining one at least.
I
Like,
love JT. I think he's great TV.
the letter in Heroes versus Villains is an all-time terrible move, but it's such good television. Like,
I think my only gripe with Heroes vs. Villains is the fact that Russell got in without anyone knowing him.
yeah,
Had people seen Samoa, it would have been a completely different season.
not
Absolutely.
not the first time someone played back to something like that happened though. Nobody had seen Rupert in All Stars either. I'm not sure the filming schedule. They seem to recognize Stephanie on Guatemala, but
I know the only time,
the
well, the first
option-
time there were two back-to-back players where they didn't know was Malcolm in Caramoan, but they had seen some episodes of Pearl Islands and China when
Okay.
Micronesia and everything was filming, and Palau had aired in its entirety. So I think
Watch the
Samoa, there was
reaction
only
that
like
say-
6 weeks.
I think China, from what I remember,
Sorry,
China was airing while Micro was filming. Because I think it was Tyson said at one point that Amanda thought she had won both seasons.
Yeah, but a few episodes had aired because that's why the audience knew James.
Okay. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I love James. He's great.
Even going back to like All Stars, if you watch the reaction as the Saboga tribe enters of like Richard Hatch seeing Rupert come out from behind the trees, he knew who he was.
Yeah, I believe like 6 episodes had aired at that point.
Little did they know the brilliance of the bunker that Rupert was bringing to that season.
Oh, man.
But no, Game Changers, I love it. And Sandra comes in with her anyone but me strategy still, but I definitely get a more aggressive vibe from her this season that we saw with Tony especially, but she's in control of her first 2 tribes. The second swap screws her over with the numbers, but who knows how far she would have gone if they didn't have 1,000 swaps this season.
And in that episode, they kind of teased that it might be tie, and I thought like an 80% chance that Sandra was going, but there was that 20% chance that she managed to squeak by again. It was a very sad day to see her finally voted off, but she had a great run in Game Changers.
Voted off to a round of applause also.
Mm-hmm.
And so
if she gets through, I think she has a great chance to go far. I think the one thing that could be holding her up, though, was the fact that the game has evolved so much between 20 and 31, and Lucina and Aubrey were playing such a different game than what some of the older players coming in were used to.
Yeah. I'm just kind of annoyed that
34.
Sandra and Suri played on 2 seasons on the same cast and were never on the same tribe.
Yeah.
Like, I want to know what that dynamic would have been.
I got to give it to Suri in that moment. I think she manages to do better than Sandra.
I feel like they would have both seen each other as a target and gone after each other. But seeing the dynamic between them on the same tribe would have been fantastic.
I agree. That would have been... Yeah, we missed out on that.
And so Sandra goes home early in Game Changers. But in my opinion, like, she still played well. Part of that was the structure of this season was weird. There was a ton of swaps. But yeah, and then
overall, I mean, I think Sandra walks out of Game Changers without any real damage to her reputation.
No. Once Heroes versus Villains happened, her reputation was set.
Yeah, she could lose and go out first 3 seasons in a row, and she'd still be the queen.
Yeah. And absolutely. So, before we get to her 4th season playing, she comes back for a season as a coach on Island of the Idols. I really enjoyed her on the season as a whole. Like Game Changers is pretty remembered and scarred for a dark moment and a dark storyline that was awful and shouldn't have happened. But like Sandra was really enjoyable once again on Heroes versus Villains. Her and Rob together were a great pair. I loved the shots of them like eavesdropping on tribal council in their little spy hut treehouse thing.
I mean, give me that every season, please.
Yes. Even without the Island of the Idols twist, just have two like former players or legends, or specifically those two,
Give me Courtney and Sandra sitting in a hut.
watching. Because there's at one point where her and Rob turn to each other like, this person has been to so many tribal councils. Or, oh, they just messed up. Like, I need that commentary during tribals.
And you think, like, Sandra is, she's there with a giant statue of her head, and same for Rob, and it's so corny and so cheesy, but it's Survivor. We love it.
The funny thing is, her and Rob both come back to play the very next season on Winners at War, which we talked about a little bit. But those statues were still there. They're doing like the pregame interviews and stuff, and like the pregame press of, oh, who do you need to watch out for? And people are like, well, need to watch out for Sandra. There's a giant statue of her head over there on that other island for a reason. I'm like, imagine coming in to play a season, and on a nearby island, there's just a giant statue of you. Like,
like,
you have a target from the beginning.
Production messed that up.
And we said with Rob last week, Rob handled some things poorly. He was never winning Winners at War. He had too big of a threat level, too big of a reputation. I would say the same thing for Sandra also.
I was expecting Sandra to be out within the first 4. She wasn't, because I think she got lucky with her tribe winning the first challenge. The Amber connection to Rob in episode 2.
The dumb poker thing.
Yeah, the poker thing, and then Danny self-destructing, and then there's the swaps after Ethan goes. But that being said, she wasn't in that bad of a position in the original starting tribe. And even Wendell says in episode 1, like, hey, what up, queen? And she's like, don't call me that. So she knows she's a threat. She knows she's not going to win. So she's like, let me just have a good time and do what I can.
I will say this. Her and Rob, like I just said, I don't think ever had a chance to win this season. Sandra was never really in a bad spot. Her reputation just was too big. Rob actively put himself in a bad spot by trying to use the same strategies that worked with a very notoriously weak cast with winners, and thinking lockdown and the buddy system would work. So Sandra played.
What do you guys think about? What do you think about Sandra's claim about Rob not telling her that he was going to be on the cast?
I don't know how upset she actually was. I think they probably edited that to look bigger than it was, because we never heard that again.
I would anticipate it was editing, but I'm not inclined to necessarily think that either way was on purpose. I think they went out and did Island of the Idols. Rob obviously has his family. They came home, probably production made another attempt, and he was able to talk Amber into doing it with him, and it kind of went from there. I don't think Rob intentionally tried to deceive Sandra in any way, nor do I think that Sandra made that up or said anything that didn't happen out there.
Yeah, I think Sandra may have gotten her feelings hurt because I think Rob may have had his little pregame alliance with Tyson and Ethan and Parvati, and he may have thought Sandra was too big of a threat to pull in, and there could have just been a disconnect there. I don't think it was malicious.
No.
So I don't think we'll ever truly know, but I think it was played out for the cameras a bit.
And I think they're still tight now in real life. So like it didn't affect anything.
Yeah.
My hot take from Winners at War is I actually liked the concept of fire token. Like they could have done it better, but I'd like to see them on a season without Edge. Like, I thought the idea of currency was fun. It was,
Yeah, I liked it.
and I wish they would have tried bringing it back again, but the new era is just supposed to be unlike anything we had seen before. So,
I do think though we have to talk about Sandra's exit on Winners at War.
oh gosh,
And
that double boot
I
episode.
know that episode was a travesty, and Sandra does shoot herself in the foot when she sells her idol to Denise, and Denise makes a great move in killing the queen, and Sandra, I I do think made a really bad call that episode.
I would argue that Denise didn't make, like, it wasn't that great of a move for Denise though, because Sandra was a target, but was wanting to work with Denise,
Hmm. I
trying to
think
give her established trust.
Sandra was such a big threat that Denise wanted to make a big power move.
And Denise then struggles to find footing in the game and struggles to find allies to work with the rest of the game.
Yeah, I mean, if
So-
Denise wanted to make a big move, she should have taken out Tony
Yeah,
to really disrupt.
I was just gonna say that exact thing is this is Sandra makes a mistake, but at the same time, in hindsight, it's a mistake. At the time, we don't know what the value of fire tokens would be because Jeff never explains this going
Yeah.
in. It could have been a lot bigger than it is. They seem to just phase out at 6 in a complete dud.
Yeah.
In contrast with that, from the other perspective, Denise makes that big move, but does she, in a way, make a huge move that everyone's going to remember and, in effect, basically give Tony the whole game?
Yeah, and it also
because
kind of puts a
Tony
target on
could have
Denise.
easily been ganged up on by 2 groups of 2 at this point, and we would have had a whole different merge.
Mhm.
It also kind of puts a target on Denise because for the rest of that season and still now, she's the Queen Slayer. So
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's a mark against people who just want to build a resume on Survivor
yeah,
and make a splash. I don't know if Denise thought it was just going to be good TV or a good move or whatnot.
I'll almost go back to, and I've said this in other topics before, but I think a lot of this move really develops from changes in the game made in between Kolong and Game Changers, and it's just huge emphasis on building a resume or you can't win the game that didn't really seem to exist before 30, 30, 31, 32, somewhere around there. And now we've started to see the pendulum swing the opposite direction in the new era.
yeah. So, and yeah, the double boot of her and Parvati both going the same episode hurts every time. But again, she wasn't in a bad spot. Like her reputation made her a target. I'm curious, like, if she doesn't make that move with Denise, and either Denise or Jeremy goes home there, how much deeper Sandra could have gone. I don't think it's that far, but it's not like Rob, who was actively making bad decisions. Sandra was playing decently.
Yeah, I wouldn't have been shocked if she had made the merge after that tribal council, if she would have stayed. Um, I don't know if she makes it to the end game, but if she survives that vote and Denise goes home, or Tony, Jeremy, or Kim, I think Sandra has a good shot at making the merge.
Yeah.
Who knows? She could slide
If
further
she
up
makes
than
the
we ever would have
merge,
expected.
and if that causes Tony to go out, we probably see a final that's like all players in the 30s.
Yeah.
How do you guys feel about Sandra raising the sail on the edge?
It's not quitting. She was already voted out.
Yeah.
People like this. People that don't like her like to brand her as a quitter for that, but she was voted out. It's not like Austin or anyone else that
Yeah.
quit at the beginning.
If anything, I think Sandra knew she stands 0 to 2% chance of winning a challenge to get back into the game. So to her, why sit here and suffer? I already have $2 million. I've already won twice. I know she's stated ever since that Had she known that if she stayed, she would have been on the jury, she would have most likely tried to have stayed. But that's stated after the fact, so I don't know how much stake we can put into that. Um, but I don't
I
fault
don't
her for
mind.
saying, yeah.
I don't fault her at all, especially knowing the way that, well, season 38, the actual Edge of Extinction season went, and that a lot of things were repetitive here.
Hmm.
Like you say, the chance of her winning was practically nothing. If they did a twist in Winners at War to try to equalize it, my mind is going back to Micronesia. And let's say they all walked into that final battle back challenge and it was something like Survivor Trivia.
Hmm.
That would have been an equalizer, but also so fun to see with these players.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I don't label Sandra as a quitter ever, and I think to use that to negate her two wins is just it's a
It's stupid.
it's a stupid move, and it's just petty.
The brilliance to Sandra's game is that it doesn't require these big or flashy moves like what Denise felt she had to do to have a resume. She builds relationships and builds bonds socially really well and gains trust and just makes these little subtle moves here and there, like taking Tawana to eavesdrop or telling Rupert, hey, don't trust Russell. It's the little things like that that just add up. I did not watch her Australian season except for like the first couple episodes. Did either of you watch that or
I
have
do.
anything to
Yeah.
say about it?
Again, she goes out on day 16.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Um,
we just want to say one more thing where we were talking about her leaving Edge of Extinction that I've thought of in the meantime is yes, she raises the sail and asks them to bring a boat to go home. But I think there's a very interesting contrast here too that we don't see on compared to the original Edge of Extinction, and that's that you don't have those two paths in Winners at War where you can just choose to go home after being voted out. So if that option presents itself as we saw in season 38, she can simply just look in the camera and say, I came, I played, I lost. Bye.
yeah, I think if she had to make that decision, she would have not even gone to the edge.
Yeah, I would
She
agree.
was forced to be there only to leave the next morning just for camera optics.
And she gives that confessional where she states how grateful she is to Survivor for giving her all these chances and for the $2 million that she's made. And she's happy. She's got nothing to prove.
For sure. To kind of wrap up Sandra's reality career, I loved her on Traders. I thought she was a lot of fun. We
Mm-hmm.
once again see her and Parvati on a season together.
Mm-hmm.
And think with the help of Peppermint, they kind of seem to squash whatever awkward feelings was between them from heroes versus villains.
Yeah.
Their fans debating it and discrediting each other a lot. So, and she was
Yeah.
great on Traders. I loved it.
And I don't know if I don't think it's safe to say that we'll never see Sandra again on
Yeah,
anything.
I hope we see her again on something.
I
Get
don't
her,
know if I need
get
to
her
see her on Survivor again. I think maybe her journey has come completely full circle.
yeah.
But I will I will see her somewhere. I know that.
Get her on Deal or No Deal Island. That show was a ton of fun.
Oh, I didn't watch that.
It's it's peak Rob. It's
Mm.
he irritates the people that are against him and they're coming after him all season. So
Well, now we'll see how Rob and Tony do on the Traders.
it's and a lot of the people that aren't huge Tony fans like to point out that the 2 seasons he won, he had Trish and he had Sarah kind of handling a lot of the social game for him. So it'll be interesting to see if he kind of develops that relationship with someone who can kind of cover the spots he's not good at. I don't think he's as bad socially as people make him out to be, but
I mean, if he manages to get these people under his wing to do his bidding, that's part of a social game.
what I'm rooting for is for Rob to be a traitor. That would be incredible.
I think they're going to make Tony a traitor, and that may just be too obvious.
Yeah.
Or he's going to be seen as a traitor right away just because of his general paranoia. I don't know. I don't really have high hopes for him that season because this game is more nuanced than his games. Jeremy, I think, could do very well.
I think Jeremy will do well. Rob will either go home super early or go super deep. I don't, other than Marquesas, I don't think there's ever a middle ground with him. But Carolyn, I don't know what to expect from.
Yeah, I
Tony's
don't know.
fun though, because Tony already gets super paranoid with Survivor, and the traitors by nature is meant to drive paranoia up
Mhm.
and drive it. So this is gonna be peak paranoia, Tony. Entertaining, running around everywhere, Tony. It's gonna be fun. He's not gonna go very far, I don't
He's
think.
gonna be hiding in a suit of armor or something.
Gonna be.
You can easily see Tony, unfortunately, being the Johnny Bananas of this season.
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah.
He just comes in and everyone's like, he's got to go.
Yeah, or he's the first banished.
Yeah. It's gonna. If he goes down, he's gonna go down in a blaze of glory, though. Tony is so much, like we saw in Game Changers, so much fun, so much laughs, even when he's playing terribly.
He's
So
just got so much energy. I just wish whatever he like, if his energy was bottled into a pill or something, I would take that every day because I wish I had that much energy.
maybe him and Jeremy can finally agree on a number of how many days are in a week.
I hope so. That scene cracks me up every time.
So, moving on. Who wants to go first for a line blindside first boot?
I gotta think of three.
All right, I'll go.
What's the criteria?
Whatever you want it to be.
Okay. All right, you guys go first.
I will go with 3 Sandra rivalries, one of which much less severe and less lived without the length of the other 2, but I need a third one, so it'll fit. I'm going with Fair Play, Russell, and Tony.
It's a good one. I'm gonna first boot Tony. I think you have no choice there. He's just too good if he gets deep in the game. That leads me to, I think it could beat Russell or Fair Play, but I'll align with Fair Play. I think he's more reliable to get to the end, specifically because I don't happen to be a female in my early 20s, which is Russell's alliance no matter what. And therefore, send Russell to the jury and see what happens there.
I'll first boot Tony because you have to, like you said, you let him get too late and he just becomes invincible all of a sudden. I'm going to align with Fair Play just for the sole purpose of I don't want to spend 39 days with Russell. Like, spending time on an island with him seems miserable, to be honest. So,
Yeah, I would agree.
not that Fair Play seems like a peach to spend that much time around, but seems better at least.
Yeah. I think I would align with Tony.
Interesting.
I would, but I'm going to throw him under the blindside category. So I'm going to flip it. I'm going to align with him in the beginning in order to gain his trust. I want him to think I'm his Trish or his Sarah, and I'm going to cut him out. So he's my blindside. I'm going to align with Fair Play. I think I know how he works in the game of Survivor, and I think I could feed into that ego. And then I got to first boot Russell.
Yeah.
I don't think he's a good person.
No, if he ever just had an ounce of self-awareness more than he has, maybe he wins one of his first 2 seasons, but he gets in his own way too much.
And even if you see things he's talking about now, he hasn't grown.
Oh, I doubt it.
Yeah.
He also, from what I've heard, played Australian and was like the first one out from his tribe. So
With an idol too.
that's fantastic. I didn't even know that part.
He was wearing it as a necklace and they voted him out. He didn't even play it.
Good job, JT. Russell
All right, So, Brett, you're up next, right?
I'm gonna give three names of players who went deep in seasons that Sandra was on. So your options are from Pearl Islands, Dara Johnson, from Heroes versus Villains, Joey Manthe, and from Game Changer, Sarah Lucina.
Hmm. I think Sarah's winning game is super underrated. She's great strategically that season, love her or hate her.
Mhm.
She's also the only winner here, so those two combined, I'm gonna first boot her. I think I'll go to the end with Dara, and because we saw more of Jerry's gameplay and more of her strategic side, and so I'll blindside her because I think I might have more trouble beating her at the end, and I'll align with Dara. But shout out to Dara. I love Dara is a great player and character to watch on the show. I love the confessional where she says fair plays. Oh, John's always lying except when he's not. Like, yeah,
It's like,
those are
okay,
the
what
two
are you trying
options.
to yeah. I think I'm aligning with Jerry. Because I would be fangirling so hard, I would just be in love. Um, blindsiding Sarah because she's such a big threat. And I agree. I think she's got an underrated winning game in Game Changers. She really came out in a sneaking kind of under the radar way, and she played a great end game. So I'm afraid of that. Um, so I think that would leave me eliminating Dara, and I think that's because she's too quiet, too sneaky.
Yeah. And
So I
also,
thought, go ahead.
I would still align with Dara, but I'm also kind of afraid of her going on an immunity run to get herself to the end.
Mhm.
But I don't think I have to worry about her like backstabbing me or anything.
Yeah, that's
So,
true. So I stuck along the Sandra category for this one as well. My three are her top alliances in three of her seasons. So you have Courtney Yates, you have Krista from Pearl Islands, and I was thinking Game Changers, throw in Malcolm.
oh, I love Malcolm.
I'm gonna
Oh,
align with Krista. Um, blindside Malcolm and first boot Courtney.
I was thinking the same thing because you can't go to the end with Malcolm, but he's big enough and strong enough. He'll help my tribe pre-merge stay away from tribal
Mhm.
better than Courtney will, which leaves me to blindside him because it's the only option. And I'll first boot Courtney, which I hate doing. She played on China and Heroes versus Villains, two of my favorite seasons, which leads me to align with Krista.
See, I think you got to align with Courtney. I think she's just a loyal member.
Yeah, that's true.
It's a tough one.
And she was in my favorite Final Three ever, and which was also an alliance with my favorite player ever. So
And Courtney almost won. Like that's wild.
the fact that Courtney got more votes than Amanda, like, is always funny to me. Like, Amanda imploded at Final Tribal it is what it is, but Courtney didn't want to be there half the time. The fact that she got more votes than Amanda is always just gonna make me laugh for whatever reason.
I love Courtney.
It's interesting though. We talked to Todd, and what Todd told us was like going into Final Tribal, he and Courtney were like chill, like ready to go. They were kind of joking around, and Amanda was like super serious, practicing it. And I think Todd said this, and I agree. I think she kind of got over rehearsed it and got in her own head a little bit. Both seasons
Interesting.
she made the end.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think we all know Amanda's fatal flaw is Final Tribal, and
Yeah,
I can't really judge her in Micronesia because she didn't know how China ended out.
yeah.
Um, so it would be interesting if she had made the final three in Heroes vs. Villains. I think we see her owning her game.
I think there's a good
Yeah,
chance
sure.
she makes the end if JT doesn't do the letter. Because
Yeah.
the heroes weren't like she was one of the few heroes actually playing. So
Yeah, I mean, you had Colby falling asleep at tribal councils.
yeah,
Um,
James was not him. not James, like the likable James we normally get.
Yeah.
That tribe was weird. But this was a really fun episode, guys. Steven.
Yeah, thank you so much. I could talk about Sandra for hours, so I'm glad you allowed me to talk about her for about an hour and a half.
And be sure to guys, be sure to check out the other reality rum shows, New Generation Challengers, Pit Stop Pals. And with that, grab your torches and head back to camp. Bye, everyone.